Evening air hangs still in the Little Mesa hallway as retired teacher Evelyn Harris stares at the phone. Her daughter-in-law Claire left beside her worn Medicare card. The screen lights up again. Mom. The buzz drills through the quiet house where her HVAC tech son Daniel swears she should just rest. Evelyn presses her thumb to accept. Hello, this is Evelyn, Claire's mother-in-law. A man answers, low and sharp. You're late. I said the wire hits today or I blow everything up. Evelyn forces a laugh. Sir, you must be mistaken. Claire is an accountant, my son trusts her with everything, yeah? Wait till he sees her Vegas wedding photos. Or her old firm sees what I send. 25 grand, or I ruin her twice. The hallway tilts. Evelyn grabs the entry table, knuckles white. What did you just say about my son's wife? Silence presses against her ear. The call dies. Only the ticking clock, the forgotten phone, and one old mother-in-law stand between a quiet kitchen and a life about to explode. A single call turns a retired mother's hallway into a crime scene of secrets. One forgotten phone drags her into a game of money, lies, and marriage. The man on the line thinks he can buy her silence and he has no idea who answered. The phone beside my Medicare card, stay tuned. It's coming soon. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. The desert evening settled over the small cul-de-sac in Mesa like a warm blanket someone forgot to wash. Evelyn Harris sat at her wobbly kitchen table, the same table that had hosted 30 years of family dinners back when Harold was alive. Now it served a different purpose entirely. Under the harsh fluorescent light, she spread out a collection of papers that seemed to multiply each month. Medicare summary notices, EOB forms, prescription receipts. Each document felt like a small puzzle piece in a picture she never wanted to complete. The magnifying glass Harold had bought her for reading made the numbers look bigger, but no less confusing. The old refrigerator hummed its familiar tune. The wall clock ticked with the persistence of something that refused to die. These sounds used to comfort her. Tonight, they made the house feel too big, too empty, too full of echoes from when laughter filled these rooms. On the counter beside her, 7 plastic compartments held her weekly medications. Morning pills, evening pills, the little blue one for blood pressure, the round white one for cholesterol. Each compartment labeled in Harold's careful handwriting, a system he had created before the cancer took him. She touched the edge of Monday's compartment, feeling the smooth plastic under her fingertip. Car doors slammed in the driveway. Evelyn folded the Medicare papers quickly, not wanting to burden anyone with her struggles over numbers that never seemed to add up correctly. Claire walked through the front door, still dressed in her navy blazer and sensible heels. Her laptop bag hit the entry table with a soft thud. She moved through the motions of coming home, but something felt different tonight. Rushed. Careful. Evening, Mom, Claire said, bending to kiss Evelyn's cheek. The gesture felt automatic, like checking a box on an invisible list. Claire's phone buzzed once in her hand. She glanced at the screen, and Evelyn caught the quick tightening around her eyes. The phone buzzed again, then a third time. Each buzz seemed to make Claire's shoulders pull higher toward her ears. Work, Claire muttered, slipping the phone into her pocket before it could ring again. She moved down the hallway toward the master bedroom with steps that were measured, controlled, deliberate. Evelyn heard the bedroom door close. Not slam, not even click loudly, just close with the kind of care someone uses when they don't want to be followed. The house settled back into its evening quiet, but the air felt charged, like the moments before a summer thunderstorm. Why does work always sound like fear lately? The thought crept into Evelyn's mind uninvited. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the familiar tightness that had nothing to do with the little blue pills in Monday's compartment. 3 days later, Daniel came home from an HVAC service call, his uniform still dusty from crawling under someone's house in the Phoenix heat. He popped open a can of beer, the cheap kind they bought in bulk from the discount store. The sound of carbonation escaping filled the kitchen. How's Claire doing? Evelyn asked, trying to sound casual while she stirred a pot of chili. She seems tired lately. Daniel shrugged, his attention already drifting toward the television where a baseball game flickered in the background. Busy season, he said. Corporate audits are killing her. You know how it is with accounting work. Evelyn nodded, but the word audit caught in her mind like a small thorn. She had worked in the school cafeteria for 27 years. She knew what busy seasons looked like. This felt different, heavier, more like the way Harold had acted when the medical bills started piling up and he stopped opening the mail. That same evening, Claire stood in the dark hallway, her back to the living room where Evelyn watched a rerun with the captions on. The television cast blue light across the worn carpet, but Evelyn's attention focused on the silhouette in the hallway. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "No," she said into the phone. "I told you I can't keep doing this." Evelyn turned the volume down on the television. The canned laughter from the sitcom felt obscene in the quiet house. "Please," Claire continued, her voice barely audible. "Just give me more time." Claire's shoulders shook once, just once, before she pulled them straight again. The gesture reminded Evelyn of herself during those long nights at Harold's bedside, when she had to be strong during visiting hours and save the crying for the hospital parking lot. When Claire returned to the living room, she smiled too brightly. "Sorry about that," she said, settling onto the couch beside Evelyn. "Client emergency." But her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the remote. The next afternoon brought Evelyn to the pharmacy, where she waited in line with her Medicare card and a prescription that cost more this month than last. The air conditioning fought against the desert heat, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look slightly green. Carol from 2 houses down waved from the vitamin aisle. She approached with a Medicare Advantage brochure in one hand and a bottle of calcium supplements in the other. "How are you holding up in this heat?" Carol asked, fanning herself with the brochure. "Getting by," Evelyn replied. "Harold always said Arizona was too hot for people over 60, but here we are." Carol laughed, then her expression shifted. "Oh, I thought I saw your daughter-in-law downtown yesterday." At the Hilton lobby. She looked upset, talking to some man in a suit. The words Hilton and man in a suit echoed in Evelyn's mind during the entire drive home. Claire worked for a small firm that handled local businesses. What would take her to a downtown hotel? What kind of client emergency happened in a hotel lobby? That night, Evelyn folded dish towels with unusual slowness, replaying Carol's comment. She arranged them in neat piles, the same way she had organized Harold's medications during his final months. Order in small things helped when larger things felt beyond control. From the living room came the sound of Claire laughing too loudly at one of Daniel's jokes. The laughter felt forced, like applause at a performance no one really enjoyed. Claire's phone buzzed against the coffee table. This time she didn't even look at it before excusing herself. "Just need some fresh air," she said, sliding open the patio door and stepping outside. Through the glass, Evelyn watched Claire pace the small concrete slab that served as their backyard patio. Her free hand gestured as she spoke, movements sharp and defensive. When she finally came back inside, her eyes were red-rimmed, but she smiled and asked if anyone wanted ice cream. Evelyn stared at her reflection in the dark kitchen window. The woman looking back had gray hair Harold used to call silver, hands that had served thousands of school lunches, and eyes that had learned to notice when children weren't eating because there wasn't food at home. Am I becoming that nosy mother-in-law everyone jokes about? She wondered. The thought made her stomach clench. But another voice, Harold's voice, seemed to whisper from the empty chair where he used to sit after dinner. Or are you the only one still paying attention? Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and fell silent. The air conditioner cycled on, filling the house with white noise that couldn't quite cover the sound of her own heartbeat. Evelyn straightened the stack of EOB forms on the table. The papers felt lighter than they had an hour ago, but the questions pressing against her chest felt heavier. She thought about Claire's forced smiles, Daniel's casual dismissal, and the man in the suit at the downtown Hilton. Something was wrong. Not maybe wrong. Not probably wrong. Actually wrong. She touched the edge of Monday's pill compartment again, feeling the familiar plastic under her fingertip, and made a decision that would change everything for their small, fragile family. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of desert heat that made asphalt shimmer before 9 o'clock. Sunlight spilled across the laminate countertops in Evelyn's kitchen, highlighting every scratch and stain that 20 years of family meals had left behind. She poured herself weak coffee from the pot Harold had bought at a garage sale. The coffee maker gurgled and wheezed like an old man clearing his throat. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled down the street, hydraulic brakes hissing as it stopped at each house. Daniel appeared in the doorway, work boots already laced, keys jingling in his pocket. "Emergency call," he said, grabbing a granola bar from the counter. "Mrs. Patterson's AC died again. Third time this month." Claire rushed past him, hair still damp from the shower, fumbling with her purse strap. "Meeting a client," she said breathlessly. "Might be late tonight." They moved through the house like actors who had rehearsed this scene too many times. Daniel kissed Evelyn's cheek. Claire waved from the hallway. Keys jingled. Sneakers squeaked against the tile floor. Promises of "we won't be long" floated back through the front door. Then silence settled over the house like dust. Evelyn stood at the sink, rinsing her coffee mug with water that ran lukewarm despite the heat outside. The routine felt familiar, comforting even. Saturday mornings had been quiet since Harold died, but this quiet felt different. Heavier, like the air before a dust storm. A buzzing sound broke through the stillness. On the entry table, Claire's phone vibrated against the wood surface. The sound was insistent, almost angry. Evelyn dried her hands on a dish towel that bore faded roosters from some long-ago kitchen theme. The phone buzzed again. The screen lit up, casting blue light across the pile of mail beneath it. Evelyn could see her Medicare card peeking out from under a grocery list written in Claire's careful handwriting. Bananas 99 cents. Bread, generic brand. The name on the phone screen read, "Mom," with an Arizona area code Evelyn didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened. Claire's mother lived in Tucson. This number had a Phoenix prefix. The phone buzzed a third time. Evelyn approached the table slowly, her slippers making soft whisking sounds against the tile. The phone felt cool and surprisingly heavy in her arthritic fingers. Through the kitchen window, she could see Mrs. Patterson's house, where Daniel's van was already parked in the driveway. If it really is her mother, and something's wrong. Harold's voice seemed to whisper from somewhere behind her left shoulder. The way it had during those final hospital stays when he worried about her making decisions alone. "Do the right thing, Evie," she remembered him saying. "Even if it complicates dinner." She swiped to answer. "Hello?" A male voice cut through the speaker, low and sharp with irritation. "You're late. I said the wire had to be in by today, or I blow everything up." Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone. The voice didn't sound like any emergency. It sounded like a threat. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Who is this?" Silence stretched across the line. In the background, she could hear traffic sounds, the distant rumble of engines and honking horns. "Claire," the voice snapped, sharper now. "Don't play dumb with me. You think your husband wants to see those wedding photos? Or your new firm?" The words hit Evelyn like cold water. Wedding photos. New firm. Harold's voice seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat drumming in her ears. "This is her mother-in-law," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Who are you, and what do you want from my family?" The line went dead. Evelyn stared at the phone screen, watching it fade to black. Her legs felt unsteady, so she lowered herself into one of the kitchen chairs. The old chair creaked under her weight, a sound she had heard thousands of times but never really noticed. From the living room came the sound of a commercial for prescription drugs. A cheerful voice promised relief from arthritis pain while listing side effects that sounded worse than the original problem. The normalcy of it felt obscene. The phone buzzed again. "Mom," appeared on the screen. This time, Evelyn declined the call. Her thumb moved across the screen with more confidence than she felt. The phone went quiet, but her mind raced. Wire transfer. Wedding photos. Blow everything up. The phrases tumbled together in her thoughts like clothes in Harold's old washing machine, creating a noise that drowned out everything else. Curiosity won over guilt. With trembling fingers, she opened the messaging app. Years of helping Harold navigate his smartphone after the arthritis made typing difficult had taught her the basics. Swipe left. Tap. Scroll up. She found deleted message threads, but the phone had automatically saved some conversations to the cloud. One thread caught her attention: messages between Claire and someone listed only as J. "You owe me after what you did. 25 grand or I send everything to your boss and your husband. Don't make me do this the hard way." Each message felt like a small cut. Evelyn scrolled further, finding an attachment that made her stomach drop. A thumbnail image of a wedding photo. She tapped it with a finger that no longer seemed connected to her hand. The image filled the screen. Claire in a white dress, radiant and laughing, her arms around a man who definitely wasn't Daniel. They stood under a cheap archway decorated with plastic flowers. In the background, neon signs advertised 24-hour wedding packages and divorce lawyers. The date stamp in the corner read March 15, 2019. 4 years before Claire had appeared in their lives, claiming she had never been married before. Evelyn studied the photo like evidence in a crime she didn't understand. Claire's smile looked genuine, unguarded. The man's hand rested possessively on her waist. They looked happy, young, completely unaware that someone would one day use their joy as a weapon. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Everything okay, Mom?" Saw Mrs. P looking worried. Evelyn typed 3 different responses. "Everything's fine. We need to talk. Your wife is being blackmailed." She deleted all 3. Finally, she settled on, "We're fine. Just tired," and immediately felt like she had told her first real lie in years. The house felt different now, as if the walls had absorbed the poison from that phone call. Every familiar object looked strange under the new light of what she had learned. The grocery list with its careful budget calculations. The Medicare cards stacked beside unpaid bills. The family photo on the refrigerator showing Daniel and Claire at last year's Christmas dinner. Both smiling beside a tree decorated with ornaments Evelyn had collected over 30 years of marriage. She looked at that photo now and wondered which of those smiles had been real. The front door opened, bringing with it a rush of superheated air and the sound of plastic grocery bags rustling. Claire's voice called out, "I'm back." Traffic was terrible. Evelyn quickly closed the messaging app and set the phone down on the table. Her hands shook as she stood, smoothing her house dress with nervous gestures. Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway, face flushed from the heat, still carrying 2 bags from the discount grocery store. "Have you seen my phone?" she asked. "I swear I had it when we left." "I think you left it on the table," Evelyn said, pointing toward the entry table. Where the phone lay like evidence of a crime neither of them was ready to discuss. Claire's eyes lit up with relief, but as she approached the phone, her expression changed. She picked it up, swiped across the screen, and went very still. "Did someone call?" Claire asked, her voice carefully neutral. Evelyn met her daughter-in-law's eyes and saw something she recognized from Harold's final months. Fear wearing the mask of normalcy. "Wrong number," she said. "They hung up when I answered." Claire nodded too quickly. "Probably a telemarketer," she agreed. "They're getting so aggressive these days." But her fingers moved across the phone screen with the desperate speed of someone checking damage after a storm. That evening, Daniel returned home exhausted and dirty, complaining about Mrs. Patterson's ancient AC unit. Claire made dinner with unusual efficiency, chattering about her client meeting with details that sounded rehearsed. They moved through the evening routine like people afraid to sit still. Evelyn watched them from her chair at the kitchen table, the same chair where she had answered that terrible phone call. She thought about wedding photos and wire transfers, about voices that promised to blow everything up, about the weight of secrets. In a house that had always been built on honesty. When Daniel and Claire finally went to bed, she sat alone in the darkened kitchen, listening to the old house settle around her. The refrigerator hummed. The air conditioner cycled on and off. From somewhere down the street came the sound of a dog barking at shadows. She thought about Harold, about the way he had hidden the worst of his pain until the very end. She thought about Claire's forced smile and Daniel's oblivious contentment. She thought about the man in the wedding photo, whoever he was, and the voice that had promised destruction with the casual tone of someone ordering coffee. This isn't just about money, she realized. This is about someone who knows Claire's secrets and thinks fear makes him powerful. She locked Claire's phone in the drawer of the old buffet cabinet, the same drawer where she kept Harold's folded flag and her mother's wedding ring. One more secret joining the others in the dark. But as she climbed the stairs to her empty bedroom, Evelyn Harris made a decision that would have surprised her younger self. She wasn't going to wait for someone else to fix this. She wasn't going to pretend she hadn't heard what she had heard. Whatever was happening to her family, whatever those wedding photos meant, whatever power that voice thought it had over Claire, it was about to meet the force of a woman who had buried her husband, raised her son, and learned that sometimes the right thing and the easy thing were completely different choices. The last thing she did before falling asleep was pull Harold's old address book from the nightstand drawer. Tomorrow, she would start making some calls of her own. The next day arrived with the relentless heat that made Phoenix summers feel like a personal insult from the sun itself. By 8 in the morning, the temperature had already climbed past 90 degrees. The air conditioner in Evelyn's house ran constantly, fighting a losing battle against the desert's determination to bake everything alive. Claire tore through the house like a woman possessed. Her hair hung uncombed around her shoulders, and dark circles ringed her eyes like bruises. She pulled couch cushions onto the floor, checked the pockets of every jacket in the hall closet, and even lifted the lid of the washing machine to peer inside. "I swear I had it right here," she muttered, checking the same kitchen counter for the third time. Her movements were sharp, desperate, like someone searching for keys when they're already late for surgery. Evelyn stood at the sink, running water over the same coffee mug she had washed twice. The sound of rushing water provided cover for her guilt, which felt heavy enough to sink ships. Behind her, Claire's panic filled the kitchen like smoke. "Maybe you left it at the client meeting yesterday," Evelyn suggested, not turning around. Her voice sounded steadier than her hands felt. "No," Claire said, too quickly. "I remember having it when I got home. I checked messages before dinner." She moved to the laundry basket beside the dryer, pulling out clothes that still smelled like fabric softener in desperation. Each piece of clothing received the kind of frantic attention usually reserved for medical emergencies. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, work uniform already stained with motor oil from an early morning call. He pulled a banana from the bunch on the counter, and watched his wife's frantic search with the bewildered expression of a man who had never lost anything more important than a 10mm socket wrench. "Babe," he said gently, "it's just a phone. Use mine for today. I'll pick up a cheap replacement on my way home." Claire's laugh came out cracked, like glass under pressure. "It's not about the phone," she said. "It's about everything that's on it. Client information, tax files, banking passwords." Daniel offered her his old smartphone, a device with a cracked screen and the processing speed of a tired snail. "At least you'll be free from spam calls for a day," he joked, kissing her forehead. Silver lining, right? But Claire's expression remained tight as she watched him leave for work. She kept glancing at the entry table where her phone usually lived, as if wishing could make it appear. "I'm meeting another client this evening," she announced, though Evelyn hadn't asked. "Late appointment. Might not be back until after 10. The explanation felt rehearsed, like lines from a play Claire had been practicing in her head. She grabbed Daniel's old phone and her purse, movements still sharp with barely contained panic. When the house finally fell quiet, Evelyn stood in her kitchen and counted to 100. Then she counted again. The silence felt pregnant with possibility and danger in equal measure. She retrieved Claire's phone from the buffet drawer, where it had spent the night beside Harold's folded flag. The device felt warm in her palm, as if it contained secrets that ran hot enough to burn. "If I walk away now," she thought, "I can still pretend I didn't see anything." But pretending hadn't saved Harold when the medical bills started arriving faster than their ability to pay them. Pretending hadn't helped when the insurance company denied his experimental treatment. Pretending was a luxury she had lost the right to claim. But pretending didn't save Harold when the bills piled up, did it? She whispered to the empty kitchen. She climbed the stairs to Daniel and Claire's shared office, a converted bedroom that contained a cheap IKEA desk. A desktop computer Daniel had built from spare parts, and stacks of financial documents that spoke of careful budgeting and modest dreams. The room smelled like printer ink and the vanilla candle Claire sometimes lit while working late. Through the window, Evelyn could see into Mrs. Patterson's backyard, where a dead lemon tree stood like a monument to Arizona's capacity for killing anything that required regular water. Beneath the desk, partially hidden behind a stack of old bank statements and 401k brochures, sat a small metal file box. The kind of container people used for important documents they didn't want to lose in a fire. A small key dangled from a hook mounted on the desk's underside, as if Claire had assumed no one would ever look closely enough to notice. Evelyn stared at that key for a long time. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled down the street, hydraulic brakes hissing at each stop. The sound reminded her of Harold's breathing during those final weeks, labored and mechanical. The key felt cool and surprisingly light in her palm. The metal file box opened with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Inside, she found a collection of documents that told a story she hadn't expected. An HR termination letter from Thornfield and Associates, a large Phoenix accounting firm. The letterhead was embossed, official, designed to carry weight. The text spoke of serious policy violations and breach of trust in the sanitized language corporations, used when they needed to destroy someone's life without admitting wrongdoing. There was also a thicker file labeled Whistleblower Internal, in Claire's careful handwriting. The folder contained copies of emails, financial reports, and handwritten notes that detailed discrepancies in client accounts. Numbers that didn't add up. Money that appeared to move between accounts without proper documentation. Questions that Claire had raised and supervisors who had told her to stop asking them. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, lay a USB drive with recordings, written on the label in black marker. Evelyn's hands sweated as she plugged the drive into Daniel's dusty laptop. The computer wheezed to life with the enthusiasm of a machine that had been asked to perform miracles on a budget of hopes and prayers. Audio files appeared on the screen, labeled with dates from 3 years ago. She clicked on the first one, and voices crackled through the laptop's tinny speakers. Claire's voice, young and uncertain, "I can't sign off on these numbers. The client deposits don't match the account balances. Someone moved $200,000, and there's no documentation." A man's voice, older and impatient, "Your junior staff, Claire. You'll do what senior partners tell you to do. These are complex transactions you don't understand yet." Another voice joined the conversation, smoother and more familiar. "If we all just stay quiet and follow procedures, this whole thing blows over. Nobody gets hurt. Nobody loses their job." Evelyn paused the recording. That third voice triggered something in her memory. The smooth confidence. The casual dismissal of consequences. It sounded like the voice from yesterday's phone call, though 3 years younger and more arrogant. She opened another audio file. This one captured a meeting between Claire and someone identified in the file notes as Senior Partner Mitchell. "The state board is asking questions about the Henderson account," Claire's recorded voice said. "If they audit our records, they'll find the discrepancies I reported." Mitchell's voice carried the tone of a man accustomed to getting his way. "What they'll find is a junior associate who made accounting errors and tried to cover them up by filing false reports. Is that the story you want in your personnel file?" The threat was clear, delivered with the kind of professional courtesy that made it sound almost reasonable. Evelyn had heard that tone before, from insurance adjusters who explained why Harold's treatments weren't covered in hospital billing departments. Who suggested payment plans that would have lasted longer than their remaining natural lives. She found another folder containing legal documents. A filing with the Arizona State Board of Accountancy. Claire's formal complaint about financial irregularities at Thornfield and Associates. The response was a form letter acknowledging receipt and promising investigation. Then came the retaliation. Performance reviews that suddenly turned negative. Assignments that kept Claire away from sensitive files. Meetings she wasn't invited to anymore. The paper trail of a woman being systematically isolated and discredited. The final document was Claire's resignation letter, dated 6 months after her whistleblower complaint. The letter was brief and professional, but between the lines, Evelyn could read the exhaustion and defeat that had driven her daughter-in-law to give up a career she had worked years to build. At the bottom of the box, she found personal items that felt like artifacts from someone else's life. A business card for a victim's rights attorney. A printout of an apartment rental listing in Phoenix. A handwritten note that simply read, "Start over. New city, new name if necessary. Forget Jason ever existed. Jason." The name from the phone messages. The voice from the recordings. The smooth-talking colleague who had told everyone to stay quiet while Claire's career burned around her. Evelyn sat back in the desk chair, surrounded by evidence of betrayal and cowardice. The late afternoon light streaming through the window made dust motes dance in the air like tiny ghosts. From downstairs came the sound of the refrigerator cycling on, a reminder that the ordinary world continued to function while her understanding of everything crumbled. Her daughter-in-law wasn't hiding a secret addiction or an affair. She was hiding the fact that she had tried to do the right thing and been destroyed for it. She was hiding the truth that powerful people could crush honest employees and make it look like justice. She was hiding her past because it contained too much integrity for the present world to forgive. The phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. "How's Mom doing?" "Everything still okay?" Evelyn stared at the message for a long time. Her son was checking on her while his wife carried the weight of secrets that could destroy careers and lives. Daniel trusted his mother to be fine and his wife to tell him the truth. He had no idea that both women in his life were drowning in different ways. She typed back, "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just organizing some old papers." It wasn't technically a lie. She was organizing papers. She just wasn't mentioning that those papers revealed a conspiracy to cover up embezzlement. The systematic destruction of a young woman's career, and ongoing extortion that threatened to tear their family apart. The shadows in the room grew longer as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Evelyn remained at the desk, USB drive still plugged into the laptop, documents spread across the surface like evidence in a courtroom. She thought about Claire's forced smiles and careful explanations. She thought about the phone call from Mom, who wasn't Claire's mother. She thought about Jason, whoever he was, who had convinced his colleagues to stay quiet while Claire lost everything for trying to tell the truth. This isn't just about money, she realized again. This is about someone who thinks other people's pain is his right to profit from. Outside, Mrs. Patterson's sprinkler system came to life, sending arcs of water across her struggling lawn. The sound of water hitting concrete reminded Evelyn of those final summer evenings with Harold, when they would sit on the back patio and watch the sun set over the desert. Talking about their plans for retirement that would never come. Harold had always said that the hardest part of getting old wasn't the aching joints or the prescription bottles. It was watching bad people win because good people were too tired to fight back. But Evelyn wasn't tired. Confused, certainly. Angry, definitely. But not tired. She carefully returned the documents to the file box, arranging them in the same order she had found them. The USB drive went back into its plastic sleeve. Claire's phone went into her pocket. The key returned to its hook under the desk. When she finally stood to leave the office, her knees protested with the stiffness of someone who had been sitting too long. But her mind felt clearer than it had in months. She might be 67 years old, living on Social Security and worried about Medicare premiums, but she wasn't helpless. She had raised a son who installed air conditioners for elderly neighbors even when they couldn't afford to pay him immediately. She had loved a husband through cancer and debt and the fear that comes with realizing your own mortality. She had served lunch to thousands of children, including the ones who came to school hungry because hunger was the only constant in their young lives. Claire had tried to protect children's college funds from thieves in expensive suits. Jason had helped those thieves destroy her for it. Now he was back, demanding payment for his silence, counting on Claire's shame and fear to keep her trapped. He picked the wrong family, Evelyn thought as she descended the stairs. And he definitely picked the wrong mother-in-law. The house felt different as she moved through it now. Not like a place where secrets festered in dark corners, but like a battlefield where the next phase of the fight was about to begin. She had intelligence now. She understood the enemy. She knew what Claire was protecting and what Jason was threatening to destroy. The only question was what to do with that knowledge. But as she settled into her kitchen chair with a cup of weak coffee and Claire's phone hidden in her pocket, Evelyn Harris began to plan her first act of war. The confrontation came 3 days later, arriving with the casual cruelty that seemed to follow Jason like a personal weather system. Evelyn sat in the waiting room of Dr. Patel's office, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of elderly patients managing chronic conditions. The vinyl chairs squeaked with each movement. A television mounted high on the wall played a morning talk show with the volume turned low. The coffee table held magazines from 3 years ago and pamphlets about Medicare Part D enrollment. She clutched her appointment reminder card, checking the time for the 4th time in 10 minutes. The monthly visit to discuss her blood pressure medication and cholesterol numbers had become routine, but today felt different. Claire's phone weighed heavy in her purse, along with copies of documents she had printed from that USB drive. "Mrs. Harris?" The nurse called her name with professional cheerfulness. "Dr. Patel will see you now." As Evelyn stood to follow the nurse, her phone rang. Claire's voice came through with unusual urgency. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but could you meet me at the medical complex? Something's happened with my client, and I need moral support." The medical complex sat adjacent to Dr. Patel's building, a collection of glass and steel structures that housed everything from urgent care clinics to specialist offices. Evelyn agreed to meet Claire in the lobby after her appointment, though something in her daughter-in-law's tone made her stomach clench. 45 minutes later, she pushed through the revolving doors into the medical complex lobby. A space designed to inspire confidence through the liberal use of marble and inspirational quotes about healing. Claire sat on a modern bench near the elevator bank, no longer alone. The man beside her wore an expensive suit that managed to look both professional and predatory. His hair was perfectly styled, and his smile carried the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about Medicare premiums or prescription copays. When he stood to greet Evelyn, his handshake lasted exactly long enough to establish dominance. "You must be Daniel's mother," he said, voice smooth as insurance company advertising. "I've heard so much about you. I'm Jason Mitchell." The name hit Evelyn like cold water. This was the voice from the phone calls. The colleague from the recordings. The man who had helped destroy Claire's career and was now demanding payment for his silence. He stood before her in the lobby of a medical building, shaking her hand and smiling like they were meeting at a church social. "Jason's an old colleague," Claire said quickly, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "He was just explaining some complications with a case I worked on before moving to Phoenix." Jason's smile never wavered, but his eyes held the calculating coldness of someone who enjoyed watching other people squirm. "It's really about professional ethics," he explained to Evelyn with the tone of a teacher addressing a slow student. "Claire made some serious errors in judgment at our old firm. Now that she's trying to rebuild her career, we need to make sure those mistakes don't follow her." The euphemisms were perfectly crafted. To anyone listening, Jason sounded like a concerned former colleague offering helpful advice. But Evelyn had heard the recordings. She knew the real story behind his carefully chosen words. "What kind of errors?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. "Financial irregularities," Jason said, settling back onto the bench with the casual confidence of someone who had never been questioned. "Missing client funds. Falsified reports. The kind of thing that destroys trust in the entire profession." Claire's face went pale, but she said nothing. Her hands twisted in her lap like she was trying to tie knots that would hold her together. "Of course," Jason continued, "these things can be managed with the right cooperation and a willingness to take responsibility for past mistakes." He placed his hand on Claire's shoulder with mock concern, but Evelyn caught the way Claire flinched. The gesture looked supportive to casual observers. In reality, it was possession disguised as comfort. "The problem is timing," Jason explained. "Claire's new firm is undergoing a compliance review. If certain information came to light now, it could be devastating. Not just for Claire, but for her family's financial stability." The threat was delivered with the smooth professionalism of a doctor explaining why expensive treatment wasn't covered by insurance. "Regrettable but necessary. Unfortunate but unavoidable." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Evelyn asked, though she knew she was walking into a trap. Jason's smile widened. "Just a gesture of good faith. $25,000 to cover the administrative costs of keeping sensitive information confidential. A small price for peace of mind." The number hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. $25,000. More money than Evelyn saw in an entire year of Social Security payments. More than Harold's life insurance policy had provided after the funeral expenses. More than Daniel made in 3 months of installing air conditioners in Phoenix's brutal heat. "We don't have that kind of money," Evelyn said quietly. Jason's expression shifted to mock sympathy. "That's unfortunate. Because the alternative is, well, let's just say Claire's current employer takes professional ethics very seriously. As does the state licensing board. And, of course, there's Daniel to consider." The mention of her son made Evelyn's chest tighten. She could see the calculation in Jason's eyes. He wasn't just threatening Claire's career. He was threatening their entire family's stability. Daniel's faith in his wife. Evelyn's ability to stay in the house Harold had bought. The fragile financial balance that kept them all above water. You need to understand something, Jason continued, his voice dropping to the confiding tone of someone sharing a trade secret. Claire brought this on herself. When you go to war with people who have resources, you shouldn't be surprised when they fight back. This isn't personal. It's just business. Claire finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. The apology broke something inside Evelyn. Not because Claire had done anything wrong, but because her daughter-in-law was apologizing for being the victim of a system designed to protect predators. Claire was saying sorry for trying to stop thieves from stealing. She was taking responsibility for other people's crimes. How long? Evelyn asked. How long have you been demanding money from her? Jason's smile faltered for just a moment, revealing something uglier underneath. Mrs. Harris, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm trying to help Claire manage a difficult situation. Nobody's demanding anything, but Evelyn had heard the recordings. She had read the messages. She knew exactly what Jason was demanding and how long he had been demanding it. Get away from my family, she said, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who had spent 30 years feeding children who couldn't afford lunch. Leave Claire alone. Stop calling. Stop texting. Find someone else to steal from. Jason's mask slipped entirely. The smooth professional facade cracked, revealing the petty cruelty underneath. Mrs. Harris, I don't think you understand the position your family is in. Claire stole money from client accounts. I have proof. I have witnesses. I can destroy her with a single phone call. The lies came easily to him, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been held accountable for anything in his life. He was used to intimidating women like Claire, young professionals who were too isolated and too scared to fight back effectively. But he had made a mistake. He had assumed that Evelyn would be as helpless as Claire felt. You're lying, Evelyn said, standing up from the bench. Her knees protested, but her voice remained steady. Claire didn't steal anything. You did. She tried to stop you, and you destroyed her career for it. Now you're trying to make her pay you for the privilege of being your victim. Jason stood as well, using his height to loom over her. The gesture was calculated to intimidate, the physical equivalent of his financial threats. Mrs. Harris, you're obviously upset. Maybe you should go home and let Claire and I finish our discussion in private. The dismissal was designed to make her feel small, irrelevant, too old and too poor to matter. For a moment, standing in that marble lobby surrounded by the antiseptic smell of medical facilities, and the quiet murmur of people discussing their own mortality, Evelyn felt the full weight of her limitations. She was 67 years old. She lived on Social Security. She took 6 different medications to keep her heart beating regularly. Her husband was dead, her savings were minimal. And her knowledge of corporate finance came from 30 years of balancing checkbooks and stretching grocery budgets. Jason was wealthy, connected, and protected by a system that valued his comfort more than Claire's honesty. He had lawyers and accountants and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about prescription copays or heating bills. What can I possibly do against someone like this? The thought hit her like a physical blow. The marble floor seemed to shift under her feet. Her heart hammered against her ribs with the irregular rhythm that sent her to Dr. Patel's office every month. The fluorescent lights overhead felt too bright, washing everything in the harsh glare of institutional indifference. For the first time since Harold's death, Evelyn Harris felt completely powerless. Claire reached for her arm, voice shaking. Mom, maybe we should just, number. The word came out harder than Evelyn intended, cutting through Claire's surrender like a blade through tissue paper. Something crystallized in that moment, standing in a lobby designed to make people feel small. While men in expensive suits explained why their pain was profitable, Evelyn thought about Harold's final months, when insurance adjusters spoke to them with the same patronizing concern Jason was displaying now. She thought about Claire's destroyed career and the young woman who had sacrificed everything for the radical idea that stealing should have consequences. She thought about Daniel, working in Arizona heat that could kill people, trusting his wife to tell him the truth. while she carried secrets that were crushing her spirit inch by inch. The anger started in her chest, hot and clean and righteous. It spread through her body like medicine, strengthening muscles that arthritis had weakened and clearing thoughts that fear had clouded. "No," she repeated, louder this time. "We're not doing this anymore." Jason's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Mrs. Harris, I don't care what you think." Evelyn's voice carried across the lobby, causing other visitors to look up from their magazines and whispered conversations. "You're a thief and a coward. You steal money from people who trust you, then you destroy anyone brave enough to call you on it. You think being rich makes you smart, but all it makes you is obvious." The words felt good leaving her mouth, each one a small stone thrown at someone who had been hurting her family with casual indifference. Jason's face flushed red. "Mrs. Harris, you're making a scene. This is a professional discussion about serious financial crimes. If you can't control yourself, the only crime here is what you did to Claire." Evelyn stepped closer to him, close enough to see the uncertainty creeping into his eyes. "And what you're still doing. But it stops now." "You can't stop anything," Jason snapped, his smooth facade finally cracking completely. "You're nobody. You're a widow on Social Security who can't afford decent health insurance. You live in a house your son pays for and drive a car held together with prayer and duct tape. What exactly do you think you can do to me?" Each word was calculated to wound. Designed to remind Evelyn of every limitation age and circumstance had imposed on her life. They were the kind of truths that hurt because they contained just enough accuracy to stick. But they were also the words of someone who had never learned that wealth wasn't the same as power, and power wasn't the same as strength. "You want to know what I can do?" Evelyn asked, her voice dropping to the quiet intensity she had used when breaking up fights in the school cafeteria. "I can call the state board and tell them you're extorting a whistleblower. I can call the FBI and play them recordings of you admitting to covering up embezzlement. I can call your parents and explain why their precious son is demanding money from a woman whose only crime was trying to protect honest people from thieves." Jason's face went white. "You don't have recordings. I have everything," Evelyn said. "Every message you sent. Every threat you made. Every lie you told to destroy her career. And I have something else you forgot to factor into your calculations." "What's that?" Evelyn smiled, feeling her late husband's presence somewhere behind her left shoulder, giving her the strength to finish what she had started. "I have absolutely nothing left to lose. And that makes me more dangerous than any rich man who's afraid someone might take his toys away." The silence that followed felt like the moment after lightning strikes, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. Other people in the lobby watched without pretending not to stare. Security guards near the information desk moved closer, sensing trouble. Jason looked around the room, calculating the cost of making a bigger scene. When he turned back to Evelyn, his expression had shifted to something uglier and more honest. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You have no idea what you're playing with." "Neither do you," Evelyn replied. "But you're about to find out." He left without another word, walking out of the lobby with the stiff dignity of someone who had just realized he was no longer the most dangerous person in the room. Evelyn watched him go, her heart still pounding but her mind clear for the first time in days. Beside her, Claire sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. "Mom," Claire whispered, "he's going to destroy us." Evelyn sat back down beside her daughter-in-law, feeling every one of her 67 years but also feeling something she hadn't experienced since Harold's diagnosis. The absolute certainty that she was on the right side of a fight worth having. "No," she said, taking Claire's trembling hand in her own. "He's going to try, but we're going to destroy him first." The words carried the weight of a promise and the steel of a woman who had finally found something worth fighting for. Outside, the Arizona sun blazed with its usual indifference, but inside the medical complex lobby, Evelyn Harris had just declared war on a man who had forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose. That evening, Evelyn sat alone in her kitchen as shadows gathered in the corners like old secrets refusing to stay hidden. The confrontation with Jason had left her drained in ways she hadn't expected. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her evening medications in the weekly pill organizer. The same routine Harold had established during his final months. The house felt different now, charged with the electricity that comes after lightning strikes. Claire and Daniel had gone to bed early, their whispered conversation drifting down the hallway like prayers in a language she couldn't quite understand. They were processing what had happened, trying to make sense of a day that had turned their quiet life into something resembling a battlefield. Evelyn touched the edge of Monday's compartment, feeling the familiar plastic under her fingertip. The gesture triggered something unexpected. A memory surfaced like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals, becoming clearer with each passing moment. Harold at this same kitchen table, 32 years ago, his face gray with exhaustion after another 14-hour shift at the plant. In front of him spread a collection of bills that seemed to multiply faster than their ability to pay them. Daniel was 3 years old then, sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware that his parents were drowning in medical debt from his birth complications. "We could declare bankruptcy," Harold had whispered, the words falling between them like stones. "Start over. Lots of people do it." But Evelyn had shaken her head, her 20-year-old hands already showing the first signs of the arthritis that would plague her later years. "We owe these people money. Real money. They trusted us to pay it back." Harold had looked at her with the expression of a man watching his wife choose honor over survival. "Evie, we can't afford honor. Not this much honor." She had reached across the table and taken his weathered hand in hers. "We'll figure it out. We always do. We don't run from our responsibilities." They had figured it out. Extra shifts for Harold. Part-time work for Evelyn at the school cafeteria that eventually became full-time. Beans and rice for dinner 3 nights a week. Christmas presents from garage sales and birthdays celebrated with homemade cake. They had paid every bill, honored every commitment, and raised their son to believe that integrity wasn't negotiable. The memory faded, leaving Evelyn sitting in the present moment with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. The irony wasn't lost on her. 32 years ago, she had insisted on paying debts they could barely afford. Now she was helping Claire fight a man who demanded money for crimes he had committed. Another memory surfaced. Harold's final week in the hospital, when the insurance company had sent a representative to discuss end-of-life financial planning. The woman had worn a sympathetic expression and spoken in the gentle tone reserved for explaining why hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Mr. Harris, we understand this is difficult," the representative had said, her manicured hands folding forms that determined whether Harold lived or died. "But the experimental treatment isn't covered under your policy. The cost would be substantial." Substantial meant $60,000. Substantial meant choosing between Harold's life and Daniel's college fund. Substantial meant watching her husband die because healing was too expensive for people like them. Harold had squeezed her hand and made the choice for both of them. "We've had 40 good years, Evie. Don't bankrupt our boy for a few more months with a sick old man." She had wanted to fight. Had wanted to storm into that insurance office and demand they explain how a company could profit from denying care to dying people. Had wanted to shake them until they remembered that the signatures on their forms belonged to human beings. With families and dreams and the radical idea that life had value beyond its ability to generate revenue. But Harold had been tired, and she had been scared, and the system had been designed to exhaust people exactly like them until fighting back felt impossible. The kitchen grew darker as evening settled over the desert. Evelyn didn't turn on the lights. Sometimes darkness helped memories flow more freely, like water finding its natural course. She thought about Daniel at age 15, coming home from school with bloodied knuckles and a suspended expression. He had found Tommy Martinez in the bathroom, 3 older boys holding him down while a 4th went through his backpack looking for lunch money. "I couldn't just walk away, Mom," Daniel had said, ice pack pressed against his split lip. "Tommy's family can't afford to pack him lunch every day. Those kids were stealing from someone who already had nothing." She had bandaged his knuckles and made him write apology letters to the principal, but privately she had been proud. Harold had been proud too. They had raised a son who couldn't watch injustice happen without acting. Now that same son slept in the next room, married to a woman who had tried to protect honest people from thieves and been punished for it. History repeating itself with different characters but the same fundamental choice between right and profitable. Evelyn stood slowly, her joints protesting the movement. She walked to the living room window and looked out at the desert night. Stars scattered across the sky like promises someone had forgotten to keep. The air conditioner cycled on, filling the house with mechanical breathing that reminded her of hospital sounds. What would Harold do? The question followed her as she moved through the house, touching familiar objects that carried the weight of shared history. His coffee mug in the dish drainer. His reading glasses on the kitchen counter. The framed photograph of their wedding day, when they had been young and poor and absolutely certain that love could overcome anything the world threw at them. Harold would fight, not with anger or violence, but with the steady persistence of someone who understood that integrity wasn't a luxury reserved for people who could afford it. He would fight because Claire had done the right thing and been destroyed for it. He would fight because Jason represented everything they had spent their lives working against. But Harold was gone, and the fighting fell to her now. The realization settled over her like a blanket she hadn't known she needed. This wasn't about money or careers or even justice in any abstract sense. This was about the kind of world she wanted to leave behind. The kind of family she had helped build. The values she had passed to her son and wanted him to pass to his children. Jason thought he could intimidate her because she was old and poor and powerless. He had calculated her worth based on her Social Security statements and Medicare cards, dismissing her as irrelevant to any equation that mattered. He had no idea what he was dealing with. He had never met a woman who had buried her husband while insurance companies counted profits. He had never encountered someone who had raised a child on love and determination when money ran short. He had never faced the fury of a grandmother protecting family values that went deeper than bank accounts. Evelyn returned to the kitchen and sat down at the table where she had made so many decisions over the years. Good decisions and bad ones. Choices that had cost them money they couldn't spare and others that had saved them from disasters they couldn't afford. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the moment when all those years of small choices added up to something larger than their individual parts. She thought about Claire's destroyed career and Daniel's trusting heart. She thought about Harold's final wishes and the promises they had made to each other during those last hospital visits. She thought about the kind of woman she wanted to be when her own time came to leave this world behind. The decision crystallized like sugar in cooling syrup, becoming solid and unbreakable. Tomorrow, she would make some phone calls. She would tell some people about Jason and his threats. She would use every connection she had made during 30 years of feeding children and caring for neighbors. And building the kind of community that protected its own. Jason had wealth and lawyers and the protection that came from a system designed to serve people like him. But Evelyn had something he had never learned to value. She had people who cared whether she lived or died, and she cared whether they did the same. The kitchen clock struck midnight, marking the end of the day when everything had changed. Evelyn touched the edge of Monday's pill compartment one more time, feeling the smooth plastic that connected her to Harold's memory. And her own determination to finish what they had started together all those years ago. Outside, the desert wind moved through the neighborhoods like a whispered promise that morning would come, bringing with it the chance to turn yesterday's decisions into tomorrow's victories. Inside, a 67-year-old widow sat alone in her kitchen and planned the next battle in a war she finally understood she had been fighting her entire life. The heat rose from the asphalt parking lot in visible waves, making the rows of gleaming pickup trucks and SUVs shimmer like mirages in the desert sun. Evelyn stood beside Maria in the shadow of a massive American flag that snapped in the dry wind above Mitchell Motors. The kind of family dealership that advertised during local news broadcasts and sponsored Little League teams. The building itself spoke of prosperity built on handshake deals and community trust. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed vehicles that cost more than most people made in a year. Inside, she could see salesmen in polo shirts circling customers with the practiced patience of fishermen who knew the difference between a nibble and a bite. Maria clutched a manila folder against her chest like armor. Her hands shook despite the 100-degree heat, and her voice had barely risen above a whisper during the entire drive from Phoenix. This was a woman who had spent 3 years watching her daughter carry the weight of secrets that should have been shared by an entire community. "Are you sure about this?" Maria asked for the third time since they had parked. He seemed so confident yesterday. So, Untouchable. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her purse, feeling the weight of Claire's phone and the USB drive that contained Jason's recorded confessions. Confident people usually are, right up until someone turns on the lights. They walked across the parking lot together, two women in their 60s. Moving with the deliberate pace of people who had learned that rushing rarely improved anything. The automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, releasing a wave of air conditioning that carried the scent of leather seats and industrial-strength carpet cleaner. The showroom felt designed to intimidate through sheer scale. Vehicles perched on elevated platforms like mechanical monuments to American prosperity. Sales awards and community service plaques covered the walls in neat rows, creating a shrine to civic responsibility and business success. A receptionist with perfectly styled hair looked up from her computer terminal, with the practiced smile reserved for customers who might actually afford the merchandise. "Good morning, ladies. How can we help you today? We're here to see Mr. Mitchell," Evelyn said, "about a family matter concerning his son." The smile faltered slightly. "Which Mr. Mitchell? Senior or junior?" "Senior. Tell him it's about Jason's professional conduct and its impact on this dealership's reputation." The words were chosen carefully, designed to pierce through layers of secretary screening and parental protection. Within minutes, they were escorted to a small conference room that smelled of leather chairs and coffee that had been sitting too long in a glass pot. Robert Mitchell Sr. entered with the confident stride of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He was broad across the shoulders, silver-haired, and carried himself with the authority of someone who had built something substantial from nothing. His handshake was firm enough to establish dominance without crossing into aggression. "Ladies," he said, settling into the chair across from them. "My secretary mentioned something about Jason and professional conduct. I hope there hasn't been some misunderstanding." His wife appeared moments later, a woman whose jewelry spoke of comfort earned through decades of successful business ownership. She carried herself with the careful grace of someone who had learned to be gracious under pressure. But her eyes held the sharp intelligence of a person who had helped build this empire one satisfied customer at a time. "I'm Patricia," she said, taking the chair beside her husband. "Jason's mother. What seems to be the problem?" The conference room felt smaller now, intimate in the way that made lies difficult to sustain. Evelyn could hear the muffled sounds of the showroom beyond the closed door, salespeople explaining financing options and warranty coverage to customers who believed they were making simple transactions. "The problem," Evelyn said, placing her folder on the polished table, "is that your son is a criminal." The words landed in the silence like stones thrown into still water. Robert Mitchell's expression shifted from professional courtesy to paternal defensiveness in the space between heartbeats. "Ma'am, I think you'd better explain what you mean by that." Evelyn opened the folder and withdrew a printed transcript from one of Claire's recordings. The pages were marked with highlighted sections that told the story of conspiracy, cover-up, and cowardice in Jason's own words. 3 years ago, your son helped senior partners at an accounting firm steal money from client accounts. When a junior associate tried to report the theft, Jason testified against her to protect his own career. The woman lost her job, her professional license, and her reputation. Patricia Mitchell's hand moved to the gold cross at her throat, fingers worrying the familiar shape like a rosary bead. "Jason would never. He's always been honest about money. We raised him to, now he's demanding $25,000 from that same woman." Maria interrupted, her voice gaining strength as the words spilled out. "He's threatening to destroy her marriage and her new career unless she pays him to keep quiet about lies he told 3 years ago." Robert Mitchell leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His expression had shifted from defensive to calculating, the face of a businessman trying to assess the scope of a potential disaster. "These are serious accusations. Do you have any proof?" Evelyn withdrew Claire's phone from her purse and placed it on the table between them. The device looked innocent enough, just another piece of technology people carried to stay connected to the world. But the information it contained could destroy reputations that had taken decades to build. "Jason has been calling and texting threats for months. We have recordings of him admitting to lying under oath. We have copies of the falsified testimony he gave to destroy an innocent woman's career." And we have proof that he's been using this dealership's resources to facilitate his extortion scheme. She pressed play on the first audio file. Jason's voice filled the conference room with casual menace, discussing his willingness to blow everything up if Claire didn't pay him. The sound quality was crystal clear, every word audible, every threat documented. Patricia Mitchell's face went pale as her son's voice described his victim as just another bleeding heart who thought she could take on the system. Robert Mitchell's jaw tightened with each recorded laugh. Each casual dismissal of the damage Jason had inflicted on someone who had tried to do the right thing. "There's more," Maria said, her voice steady now that the truth was finally being spoken aloud. She laid out copies of the HR documents, the whistleblower complaint, and the legal papers that showed the systematic destruction of Claire's career. "Your son didn't just steal money," she continued. "He helped destroy the life of a young woman whose only crime was refusing to sign off on fraudulent financial reports. Then he lied under oath to cover his tracks. Now he's demanding payment for his silence like some kind of mobster." The word hung in the air between them. Mobster. Not the kind of term anyone associated with a family business that sponsored youth soccer leagues and donated to church fundraisers. Robert Mitchell studied the documents with the focused attention of someone who understood that small numbers could have devastating consequences. "These financial irregularities," he said slowly. "How much money are we talking about?" $2 million in the Henderson account alone, Evelyn replied. "Money that belonged to a children's scholarship fund. Money your son helped senior partners steal from kids who needed it to go to college." The number seemed to echo in the small room. $2 million. Money meant for children's education, diverted into accounts that benefited wealthy men who already had more than they could spend in several lifetimes. Patricia Mitchell pressed her hand to her mouth, and for a moment, the only sounds in the room were the hum of air conditioning and the distant rumble of traffic on the street outside. "Jason said he was protecting his career," she whispered. "He said if he didn't go along with his supervisors, he'd be blacklisted from the entire industry." "So he destroyed someone else's career instead," Evelyn said quietly. "He chose his own comfort over an innocent woman's life. And when she moved away to start over, he followed her and started demanding money." Robert Mitchell stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward with more force than necessary. He walked to the window overlooking the showroom, hands clasped behind his back in the posture of a man trying to process information that threatened everything he had built. "Call him," he said without turning around. "Call Jason. Tell him he needs to come in right now." Patricia Mitchell's fingers trembled as she dialed their son's number. The conversation was brief, conducted in the careful tone parents used when they suspected their children had done something that would require serious consequences. "He's on his way," she said, ending the call. "He asked what this was about, but I told him he'd find out when he got here." They waited in silence that felt heavy with approaching consequences. Evelyn thought about Claire at home, probably sitting at their kitchen table pretending to work while anxiety ate at her from the inside. She thought about Daniel, who still didn't know the full extent of what his wife had endured or what his mother was doing to protect their family. 15 minutes later, Jason walked into the conference room, carrying the confidence of someone who had never been held accountable for anything significant in his entire life. He wore another expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled, his smile carrying the casual arrogance of someone who believed his parents' money made him untouchable. "Mom, Dad," he said, bending to kiss his mother's cheek. "What's the emergency? I have a client lunch in an hour." His expression shifted when he saw Evelyn and Maria sitting across from his parents. The casual confidence flickered, replaced by something warier but still fundamentally certain of his own invulnerability. "What are they doing here?" he asked, settling into the chair beside his father with the entitled posture of someone who had never doubted his welcome anywhere. Robert Mitchell slid the folder of documents across the table. "Read these. Then explain to me why two grandmothers drove across the desert to tell me my son is a criminal." Jason's face went through several expressions as he scanned the papers. Confusion gave way to recognition, then to anger, and finally to something approaching fear. But when he looked up from the documents, his expression had settled into indignant denial. "This is harassment," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to use legal-sounding words as weapons. These women are upset about some business decisions that happened years ago. They're trying to damage my reputation because they don't understand how corporate accounting works." It was a masterful deflection, delivered with the confidence of someone who had talked his way out of consequences his entire life. He was counting on his parents' love and trust, betting that they would believe his version of events over evidence provided by strangers. But his parents had heard his voice on the recordings. They had seen the documents in his own handwriting. They had listened to him threaten to destroy an innocent woman's life for money. "Play the recording again," Robert Mitchell said to Evelyn. "The one where he admits to lying under oath." Jason's protest died in his throat as his own voice filled the room again, casual and cruel as he described falsifying testimony to protect his career. His parents listened with expressions that grew harder with each word, each laugh, each dismissive comment about the woman whose life he had helped destroy. When the recording ended, Patricia Mitchell spoke in a voice that barely contained her fury. "How could you do this? How could you lie under oath? How could you demand money from someone you already destroyed?" Jason's carefully constructed confidence finally cracked. "Mom, you don't understand the pressure I was under. If I hadn't gone along with the senior partners, they would have destroyed me. I had to protect myself." "So you protected yourself by destroying someone else," Robert Mitchell said. His voice carried the cold anger of a man who had built his reputation on honesty and watched his son make it worthless. "You lied under oath. You helped steal money from children's college funds. And now you're extorting your victim." The word victim landed like a physical blow. Jason had never been forced to confront the human cost of his choices, never had to see Claire as anything more than an obstacle to his own advancement. "She brought it on herself," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "She should have kept her mouth shut like everyone else. She should have understood how the world really works." The defense revealed everything ugly about his character. No remorse for the theft. No regret for the perjury. No acknowledgement that Claire had been trying to protect honest people from criminals. Just anger that his victim had refused to enable his crimes quietly. Evelyn withdrew a sheet of paper from her folder and placed it on the table. "This is a cease and desist agreement prepared by the legal aid clinic. You're going to sign it. You're going to delete every photo and message related to Claire. You're going to admit in writing that your testimony against her was false. And you're going to agree to restitution if any damage can be proven." Jason laughed, but the sound carried more hysteria than humor. "You can't make me do anything. I have rights. I have lawyers. You're just a couple of old women who have nothing left to lose," Evelyn finished quietly. "Which makes us more dangerous than any lawyer you can afford." Robert Mitchell leaned forward, his voice dropping to the tone he probably used for final negotiations on expensive vehicles. "Son, let me explain your situation. These ladies have evidence of criminal extortion. They have recordings of you admitting to perjury. They have documentation of your involvement in embezzlement. If they take this to the district attorney's office, you'll be facing federal charges. And if they take it to the county contract office," Patricia Mitchell added, "this dealership loses its fleet contract. The contract that pays for your apartment, your car, and your expensive suits." The family business angle hit Jason harder than legal threats. He had lived his entire life supported by his parents' success, never considering that his actions could threaten their livelihood. "More importantly," Robert Mitchell continued, "if this becomes public, everyone in this community will know that I raised a son who steals from children and destroys innocent people for money. That's not a legacy I can live with." The calculation was simple and devastating. Sign the agreement or face criminal prosecution, financial ruin, and public shame. Jason looked around the room, searching for an ally or an escape route, finding neither. His mother's expression held the kind of disappointment that cut deeper than any anger. His father's face showed the grim determination of a man prepared to sacrifice his son to save his own integrity. Evelyn and Maria watched him with the patient attention of people who had already won and were simply waiting for him to acknowledge reality. "The recording equipment is still running," Evelyn said, pointing to her phone. "Whatever you say next becomes part of the official record. Choose your words carefully." Jason stared at the agreement for a long time, his entire world reshaping itself around the reality of consequences he had never expected to face. Finally, he picked up a pen with the reluctant motion of someone signing his own surrender. I harassed and extorted Claire Morrison, he said, each word dragged out of him like a splinter being removed from infected flesh. She did nothing wrong. I lied under oath to protect myself and the senior partners who stole money from client accounts. Everything I said about her was false. He signed the agreement with a signature that looked nothing like the confident flourish he had probably practiced for important contracts. When he finished, he looked up at his parents with the lost expression of a child who had finally pushed too far. "Are we done here?" he asked quietly. "We're done," Evelyn said, gathering the signed documents. "Stay away from Claire. Delete everything. And if you ever contact our family again, this recording and every piece of evidence goes straight to the FBI." Jason left the conference room without another word, walking out of the dealership with the defeated posture of someone who had just learned that wealth wasn't the same as power, and power wasn't the same as being untouchable. The silence that followed felt like the moment after a thunderstorm, when the air clears and everything feels washed clean. Patricia Mitchell wiped tears from her eyes with a tissue that smelled like expensive perfume. Robert Mitchell stared out the window at the American flag snapping in the desert wind. "I'm sorry," Patricia said finally. "I'm sorry for what my son did to your daughter. I'm sorry we didn't see what kind of man he was becoming." Evelyn reached across the table and took the other woman's hand. "You didn't make his choices for him. And you did the right thing when you found out about them." They walked out of the dealership into heat that felt less oppressive than it had an hour earlier. The parking lot looked the same, but everything else had changed. Jason's power over their family had been broken by two grandmothers with evidence and the courage to use it. As they reached their cars, Maria turned to Evelyn with tears streaming down her face. "Do you think it's really over?" Evelyn looked back at the dealership, where a family was probably having the most difficult conversation of their lives. She thought about Claire at home, free for the first time in 3 years from the fear that had been eating at her spirit. She thought about Daniel, who would finally learn the truth about his wife's courage and his mother's determination. "It's over," she said with the certainty of someone who had just watched justice happen in real time. "He doesn't get to write the last chapter of our kids' lives anymore." The kitchen felt different when Evelyn and Maria returned from the dealership, as if the air itself had been filtered clean of something toxic. Sunlight streamed through windows that somehow seemed brighter, casting familiar shadows that no longer held the weight of secrets. The house smelled like the vanilla candle Claire had lit that morning, mixing with the lingering aroma of coffee and the desert heat that pressed against the glass like a patient visitor. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open but clearly ignored. Her hands rested flat on the surface, fingers spread wide as if she were trying to anchor herself to something solid. When she looked up at the two women entering through the front door, her eyes held the hollow exhaustion of someone who had been holding her breath for 3 years. "It's done," Evelyn said simply, settling into the chair across from her daughter-in-law. Jason signed the agreement. He admitted everything on the record. "He can't hurt you anymore." Claire's face crumpled like paper exposed to flame. The tears came in waves, each one carrying away months of fear that had calcified into something harder than bone. Maria moved to her daughter's side, wrapping arms around shoulders that shook with the violence of finally letting go. "I can't believe it's over," Claire whispered between sobs. "I was so scared. Every phone call, every email, every knock on the door. I thought he'd never stop." Evelyn reached across the table and took Claire's free hand in her own. The skin was soft but the bones underneath felt fragile, like those of a bird that had been caged too long. "You don't have to be scared anymore. He knows we have everything. If he even thinks about contacting you again, he'll be facing federal charges." The legal aid attorney had been clear about the implications. Extortion across state lines constituted federal crime. Jason's recorded confessions provided evidence that any prosecutor would love to present to a jury. His parents' cooperation ensured that he had nowhere to hide, no family resources to shelter behind. But more than legal consequences, Jason faced something he had never encountered before. Genuine accountability from people who refused to be intimidated by wealth or connections. "How did you know?" Claire asked, looking between her mother and mother-in-law with something approaching awe. "How did you figure out what was happening?" Evelyn squeezed Claire's hand gently. "You carried it in your shoulders. In the way you flinched every time your phone rang. In how you apologized for things that weren't your fault. I've seen that look before, in women whose husbands controlled them through fear. She thought about Harold's final months, when insurance companies had wielded bureaucracy like a weapon against families too exhausted to fight back effectively. The same pattern of institutional intimidation, designed to exhaust victims until surrender seemed like the only rational choice. And, Maria added, smoothing her daughter's hair with the automatic gesture of a mother who had never stopped seeing her child in the adult woman. Your mother-in-law has a gift for recognizing bullies. She sees right through them. The afternoon passed quietly as they processed what had happened and what it meant going forward. Claire called her current employer to request a meeting, armed with documentation that explained her abrupt departure from her previous firm. The conversation was brief, professional, and concluded with her boss's assurance that her job remained secure. Dr. Martinez says the firm has dealt with whistleblower situations before, Claire reported after ending the call. He appreciates employees who prioritize ethics over convenience. He actually seemed impressed that I'd stood up to senior partners. The validation felt surreal after years of carrying shame for doing the right thing. Claire had internalized the message that honesty made her unemployable, that integrity was a luxury reserved for people who could afford to lose their careers. Learning that some employers valued courage over compliance felt like discovering water in the desert. Daniel arrived home as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that made Phoenix's harshest season look almost beautiful. He carried the exhaustion of another day spent crawling through spaces designed for pipes. Not people, but his step quickened when he saw the three women sitting around the kitchen table. "Everything okay?" he asked, noting the unusual gathering and the tear-streaked faces. "Mom, you look like you've been crying." Evelyn glanced at Claire, who nodded with the expression of someone finally ready to share weight she had carried alone too long. "Sit down, sweetheart. Your wife has something to tell you." The story unfolded slowly, interrupted by questions that revealed Daniel's growing anger at what had been done to his family. He listened to Claire's explanation of the embezzlement, her whistleblower complaint, and Jason's systematic destruction of her career with the focused attention of someone trying to understand how evil could wear such ordinary clothes. When Claire reached the part about Jason's recent extortion attempts, Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "That son of a bitch was threatening you? For months? And you didn't tell me?" The hurt in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. Claire reached for his hand, feeling the calluses that came from honest work performed in brutal conditions. "I was scared you'd think less of me. That you'd wonder if I really had stolen money. That you'd decide marrying me had been a mistake." Daniel pulled her into his arms with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had just realized how close he had come to losing something precious. "Baby, I would never think that. Never. You're the most honest person I've ever known. If you filed a complaint, it's because someone needed to be stopped." He turned to Evelyn with an expression that mixed gratitude with embarrassment. "Mom, I'm sorry you had to handle this alone. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected my own family." "You did protect your family," Evelyn replied. "You married a woman brave enough to stand up to thieves, even when it cost her everything. You built a home where she felt safe enough to start over. And you raised yourself to be the kind of man who would rather know hard truths than comfortable lies." The kitchen filled with the comfortable silence of people who had fought a battle together and emerged victorious. Outside, the desert evening settled over their neighborhood with its familiar rhythm of sprinkler systems and air conditioners cycling on and off. Maria stayed for dinner, helping Evelyn prepare a meal that felt more like celebration than sustenance. They moved around the small kitchen with the efficiency of women who had learned to stretch budgets and make do with whatever was available, but tonight the simple ingredients felt abundant. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Claire admitted as they sat down to eat. 3 years of looking over my shoulder doesn't just disappear overnight." 2 months later, the desert morning arrived with the gentle heat of autumn in Arizona. When temperatures dropped below triple digits and people remembered why they had chosen to live in a place where swimming pools functioned year-round. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with her weekly pill organizer. But this time Claire sat beside her with her own laptop, helping compare Medicare Advantage plans while soft classical music played from Daniel's old radio. The Premium Plus plan covers your arthritis medications, Claire said, scrolling through coverage details with the patience of someone who no longer checked her phone every 30 seconds for threatening messages. But the standard plan has better dental coverage. Which matters more to you? The question felt like luxury. For the first time in 3 years, they could plan beyond the immediate crisis. Could think about dental appointments and prescription coverage without wondering if their family would survive the week intact. Let's go with the Premium Plus, Evelyn decided. At my age, keeping the joints moving matters more than perfect teeth. Claire laughed, the sound natural and unforced. Her shoulders had lost the perpetual tension that had made her appear to be bracing against invisible storms. She wore her hair down now instead of pulled back in the severe style she had adopted during the months of hiding. The change made her look younger, softer, more like the woman Daniel had fallen in love with. Your teeth are perfect anyway, Claire said, closing the laptop with satisfaction. There, your enrollment is submitted. You'll get your new insurance card next month. The simple transaction represented something larger than healthcare coverage. They were making plans that extended beyond tomorrow, investing in a future they could finally believe would arrive. The mundane details of daily life had regained their power to comfort instead of threaten. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for work but moving with less urgency than he had carried during the crisis months. His HVAC uniform was clean and pressed, his tools organized in the kind of methodical arrangement that spoke of a man whose mind was no longer distracted by unspoken family emergencies. Morning, ladies, he said, kissing Claire's cheek and squeezing Evelyn's shoulder. Mrs. Patterson's AC is acting up again, but I should be home by 4. Want to grill something tonight? The suggestion carried the weight of normal family planning. Dinner could be anticipated with pleasure instead of approached with dread. Evening conversations could focus on weekend plans instead of crisis management. I'll pick up some chicken, Claire offered. The good kind, not the discount stuff we've been buying. Money remained tight, but the crushing anxiety about losing everything had lifted. Claire's promotion to senior accountant had brought a modest but significant pay increase. More importantly, it had restored her confidence in her professional worth and her ability to provide for their family. After Daniel left for work, the two women settled into the routine that had developed over the past weeks. Evelyn handled household organization while Claire managed the financial planning that had once terrified her. They moved through their tasks with the easy coordination of people who had learned to trust each other completely. I got a call yesterday, Claire mentioned while organizing receipts for tax preparation. From a woman in Tucson whose daughter is being harassed by her former boss. She heard about what happened with Jason and wanted advice. The request wasn't unusual. Word had spread through networks of legal aid attorneys and victims advocates about two grandmothers who had successfully confronted a white-collar criminal. Evelyn had fielded similar calls from families dealing with workplace retaliation and financial intimidation. What did you tell her? Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. Same thing I tell everyone. Document everything. Find allies. Don't fight alone. Claire paused in her sorting, looking at Evelyn with an expression that mixed gratitude with determination. And I gave her your phone number. Hope that's okay. It was more than okay. Evelyn had discovered that her experience with Harold's medical bills, combined with her natural ability to see through institutional double talk, made her unexpectedly effective at helping families navigate bureaucratic intimidation. She wasn't a lawyer or a financial advisor. But she had become something more valuable, living proof that ordinary people could stand up to systems designed to crush them. I'll call her this afternoon, Evelyn promised. After I finish organizing these Medicare statements. The work had become meaningful in ways she hadn't anticipated. Each family that learned to fight back effectively made the next fight easier for everyone. Each victory against workplace bullies or insurance company intimidation created precedent for others to follow. Their personal battle had evolved into something approaching a movement. Claire's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it without the reflexive fear that had characterized her responses for 3 years. Now phone calls brought news about work projects and social invitations instead of threats and demands for money. Dr. Martinez wants to know if I'm interested in teaching a workshop on fraud detection, she reported. For small business owners who can't afford big accounting firms. He thinks my experience would be valuable. The irony continued to amaze them. Claire's destroyed career had become the foundation for work that felt more meaningful than anything she had done before Jason's betrayal. She was using her knowledge to protect honest people from sophisticated thieves, turning her victimization into expertise that served others. "Will you do it?" Evelyn asked, though Claire's expression had already provided the answer. "I think so. It feels good to use what happened to me to help someone else. Like making something useful out of all that pain." The afternoon passed quietly as they worked through their respective tasks. Claire prepared materials for the fraud detection workshop while Evelyn called the woman in Tucson whose daughter was facing workplace retaliation. The conversation lasted an hour, covering everything from documentation strategies to finding pro bono legal representation. The key, Evelyn explained to the worried mother, is remembering that bullies count on isolation. They want victims to feel like they're facing the problem alone. But once you start connecting with other people who've been through similar experiences, you realize the bullies are usually cowards who fold as soon as someone fights back effectively. When Daniel arrived home that evening, he found the two women on the back patio watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of purple and gold. The small concrete space had been transformed with potted plants that somehow survived the Arizona heat through careful watering and strategic placement. "Good day?" he asked, settling into the lawn chair they had bought at a garage sale and repaired with materials from his tool collection. "Productive day," Evelyn replied. "Claire's going to teach fraud detection workshops, and I helped another family figure out how to fight back against workplace intimidation." Daniel smiled with the pride of a man whose wife and mother had become local heroes without seeking recognition or reward. "My women are changing the world one family at a time." The phrase carried affection and accuracy in equal measure. They weren't activists or political organizers. But they had discovered that personal integrity, applied consistently, could create changes that rippled outward in unexpected directions. They grilled chicken as planned, eating on the patio while the desert evening cooled around them. The conversation moved easily between daily logistics and larger dreams, touching on Claire's workshop plans, Daniel's idea for expanding his HVAC business, and Evelyn's growing involvement with families facing various forms of institutional intimidation. "I keep thinking about something Harold used to say," Evelyn mentioned as they cleaned up after dinner. "He said the difference between surviving and living was whether you could use your pain to help someone else feel less alone." The memory brought tears to her eyes, not from sadness but from recognition that she had finally understood what her husband meant. The months of watching Claire suffer in silence had been painful. But the experience had taught them skills that were now protecting other families from similar harm. Claire reached across the table and squeezed Evelyn's hand. "He would be proud of what you've built. What we've all built together." As the stars began to appear in the clear desert sky, they remained on the patio, sharing stories and making plans that extended far beyond their immediate concerns. The conversation felt different from the careful exchanges that had characterized their interactions during the crisis months. They spoke with the easy honesty of people who had tested their family bonds under pressure and found them stronger than they had imagined. "I love this," Claire said quietly, gesturing toward the lights beginning to twinkle in houses across their neighborhood. "Just sitting here, planning normal things, not being afraid of tomorrow." The simple pleasure of anticipating the future without dread represented a luxury they had almost forgotten existed. For 3 years, Claire had lived in the perpetual present tense of survival, unable to plan beyond the immediate crisis. Now they could discuss vacation possibilities and retirement savings, household improvements and career development. Daniel wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders, pulling her closer in the cooling evening air. "We're going to be okay," he said with the certainty of someone who had watched his family survive their worst fears and emerge stronger. Evelyn looked at her son and daughter-in-law, seeing not just the people they had become, but the family they had built together through deliberate choice and consistent care. They had faced forces designed to destroy honest families, and they had not just survived but thrived by refusing to compromise the values that defined them. Later that evening, after Daniel and Claire had gone to bed, Evelyn sat alone in her living room with Harold's photograph in her lap. The picture showed him during one of their last good days together. smiling over coffee in their kitchen while morning sunlight streaming through windows that had witnessed decades of family conversations. "We did it," she whispered to the photograph. "We raised a family that fights for what's right. We built something worth protecting, and when it was threatened, we protected it." The house settled around her with familiar creaks and sighs, but the sounds felt like contentment rather than loneliness. She had spent months carrying secrets that slowly poisoned the atmosphere, but now the air felt clear and clean. Their home had become a launching pad for positive change instead of a refuge from hostile forces. The phone rang, and Evelyn glanced at the caller ID before answering. Another family dealing with financial intimidation, referred by the legal aid clinic. She settled into her chair and prepared to listen to another story of honest people being bullied by systems designed to protect wealth over integrity. "Hello," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who understood exactly what the caller was experiencing. "Tell me what's happening, and let's figure out how to fix it." The conversation lasted until midnight, covering strategies for documentation, finding legal representation, and connecting with other families who had faced similar challenges. Evelyn found herself dispensing advice that came from hard-won experience rather than theoretical knowledge. When she finally ended the call, she felt the deep satisfaction that comes from using personal pain to ease someone else's burden. The months of watching Claire suffer had been transformed into expertise that was now protecting strangers she would never meet. As she prepared for bed, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a worried widow watching her daughter-in-law carry secrets that were slowly destroying her spirit. Tonight, she was part of a family that had not only survived their worst crisis but had transformed it into strength that served their entire community. The transformation felt miraculous in its simplicity. They had used truth instead of lies, courage instead of fear, love instead of hate. They had proved that ordinary people, armed with determination and basic decency, could stand up to forces much larger than themselves. Life didn't end just because it broke once. What fell apart could be the very place where they learned to stand again. The months of crisis and fear had become the foundation for work that felt more meaningful than anything they had done before. If this story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything she had gone through meant something today. The pain of watching Claire suffer, the fear of confronting Jason. The uncertainty of whether an elderly widow could make any difference in a fight against wealthy criminals, all of it had been transformed into purpose. If this resonated with anyone struggling against forces that seemed too powerful to overcome, then perhaps their experience could become the seed of another family's victory. Their words and their example might become the encouragement someone else needed to take the first step toward fighting back. They had learned that integrity wasn't a luxury reserved for people who could afford it, but a tool available to anyone brave enough to use it. They had discovered that family bonds, tested under pressure, could become stronger than any external force trying to break them apart. Thank you to everyone who had supported families like theirs through legal aid clinics and victims advocacy groups. Thank you to people who believed that honest individuals deserved protection from sophisticated criminals. Thank you for spending this time with their story. And for believing that ordinary families could create extraordinary change through simple persistence and shared love. Their small house in Mesa had become a place where broken things were mended, where threatened families found their strength, and where the simple act of caring for each other had proved more powerful than money, influence, or institutional indifference. The desert night settled over their neighborhood with its familiar rhythm, but inside their home, 3 people slept peacefully for the first time in years, knowing that tomorrow would bring opportunities to help other families discover their own power, to fight back against forces that counted on fear and isolation to maintain control. They had won more than their personal battle. They had proved that love, backed by determination and guided by integrity, could overcome systems designed to crush people who dared to do the right thing. Their victory belonged to every family willing to stand up for what they knew was right, regardless of